This is Management Principles, and the topic is Managing Communication. Effective communication is perhaps the most critical of a manager's skills. Communication is the process by which information is exchanged and understood by two or more people, usually with the intent to influence or motivate behavior. In the process of communication, the person who is sending a message encodes it. That is, he or she selects the symbols, the language, the graphics, the written or verbal form, and the channel by which it is to be sent. The message is the formulation of the idea, and the channel is the means by which it is sent, such as a face-to-face conversation, a video communication, an email, a text message. Feedback uses this same system. The only difference is that the context of the return message and communication is set. It's based on and in reaction to an original communication. Now, communication can be centralized or decentralized. In some situations, for example, during a crisis, centralized communication may be the preferable system. All data is communicated to a single person who makes decisions and communicates them outward. It helps to keep activity coordinated. Decentralized communications involve multiple communications with, for example, team members. It is more useful for product development, brainstorming, creative problem solving, and more. Now, there's a hierarchy of communication based on the richness of the channels, that is, the amount of information that can be transmitted during a communication. Face-to-face communication, which includes two-way internet voice and video communication, conveys the verbal message along with tone and facial expression, and the latter two create more of an impression than the first does. As the text highlights, a progression of communication in terms of their channel richness proceeds from reports and letters to memos to written electronic communications to telephone calls and then face-to-face communications. This does not mean that face-to-face communications are always preferable to telephone calls or emails or anything else. Recall from an earlier discussion that managers tend to be very busy. A telephone call can be an interruptive thing. It instantly assumes a top position on what it is a manager has to deal with because of its immediacy. A call about a seemingly trivial topic could be seen as interruptive. A face-to-face meeting may be channel-rich in that it conveys much about the attitude, tone, and context of the communication. But the tone and context of the communication are not always the most critical points. At times, a manager may simply want to learn or disseminate some fact without the context that accompanies it in an in-person meeting. If, however, there is a chance of being misunderstood, or the communication is a cancellation of an engagement or an apology, a face-to-face meeting or a telephone call may be preferable, in part because a person's voice can convey some emotion or context, but also because it gives an opportunity for feedback and an assurance that the message is being received in the spirit in which it is given. Communications should be clear and candid. They should be fact-based rather than judgmental, and they should be clear, specific, and direct. And depending on the importance of the message, multiple channels can be used. For example, notes are typically taken at an important meeting and circulated so that everyone in attendance has a common record of what was said. A directive from a manager to one or more people that was spoken can be followed up with an email for the same reason. Communications channels can be formal or informal. Formal channels, following a chain of command within an organization, can be upward, downward, or horizontal, and these follow organizational structure. In practice, a single email communication may have an upward, downward, and horizontal list of recipients. In that organizational structures are generally pyramid-shaped, the volume of communication varies by level. Senior managers tend to have far more communications than people in the lower tiers of an organization, and so tend to batch downward communications to the extent possible. Communications designed for upward distribution tend to be more focused. When working for an organization, it's often helpful to build personal relationships across departmental and hierarchical boundaries, and in some cases across organizational lines as well. It can be helpful for learning about what is happening in and around the firm through informal communications, for job searches, for gaining an understanding of the dynamics of how the organization operates, and much, much more. Lastly, a system for communicating during a crisis should be established and understood well in advance of the unfortunate event. The need to respond quickly is the critical thing. When a manager is communicating during a crisis, he or she is in a spotlight, and what is being seen is how the crisis is being handled, as well as how competent the spokesperson is. The advice given in the test to stay calm and listen to be visible, and to determine facts and communicate them whether they are positive or negative, these are things that will help establish a manager's and an organization's credibility. If at the end of the crisis, listeners walk away with the impression that the communications were clear, transparent, honest, forthright, that will be the impression they have of the organization itself. In the next audio file, we're going to expand on the notion of communicating within and on behalf of groups when we consider the topic of leading teams. Good evening.